The final message of the last apostle. Basic training in what the New Testament is really all about. Many of you have asked me to do a basic training series to how to start, how to get going, and I did one video, which was a good video, which is going to stay. But then I realized, why should I reinvent the wheel? Because the Apostle John did exactly what you're asking me to do. He created a recap, a reassessment. He wrote really the final will and testament of the apostolic era. John was the final message, the final messenger. John was the last apostle, and he did write the final message of the last apostle. And I wrote a book entitled the same thing, and it's already there. It's a perfect start here, go through, and it gives you a complete and total understanding of the New Testament and of the original message of the Christ, because John wrote to reveal false doctrine, and John wrote with a very unique perspective on the entire New Testament era. So this is basic training. And I would encourage you to get this book. It's $1.99 in the ebook version. It's $24.99 for the paperback version. And it's a very nice paperback. It's 350 pages, so it's a real nice book. This one's my working copy, so it got a little jacked up. But I recommend that you get it because it really is the basic training. If you want a basic how-to from A to Z, this is it. Final message of the last apostle, taken from the works of the Apostle John. And without any further ado, bam! Let's do this thing. Final message of the last apostle. It is subtitled Alien Agenda in the New Testament. Don't let that throw you, because that really is part of the final message of the last apostle, is that there is a UFO ET alien agenda woven throughout the pages of the New Testament. And yes, that matters. It's big time matters. So we'll go ahead and go through this book, and this is going to be our best way to give you the basics in a easily understandable way. And this, I put this quote in here from G.K. Chesterton. Fairy tales do not tell children the dragons exist. We know there's bad things out there. We know there's things against us. We know there's things against us. We're going to start this from the basics. Children already know the dragons exist. We know that. Fairy tales tell the children that the dragons can be killed. And in this case, fairy tales is used in a positive sense. And that's what the final message of the last apostle is. The final message of the last apostle tells us that the dragons that we know exist, and very literally, can be killed. And we're in the dragon slaying business. And cousin, business is a booming. All right. Now, in order to really understand what's going on in the New Testament, and to really understand what was going on in the New Testament era until now, you have to be familiar with the term false flag. Now, if you're watching this channel, you probably are, or maybe you're a person that's still in the Christian church and you haven't really made that break yet. And I do say yet because I hope that you will, and you'll know why as we keep going through this. But a false flag describes covert military or paramilitary operations that are designed to deceive in such a way that the operations appear as though they're being carried out by entities, groups, or nations other than those who actually planned and executed them. Operations carried out during peacetime by civilian organizations as well as covert government agencies may by extension be called false flag if they seek to hide the real organization behind an operation. And I believe that one of the main thrusts of the final message of the last apostle, talking about John, was to point out a great false flag agenda within the pages of the New Testament. This book has no dedication. It's dedicated to you, the reader, and to your consideration of the following question, especially to those of you that are still within the Christian realms as you study this. What would you do if you saw absolutely irrefutable evidence that disproved the validity of the things you've always believed in? I ask that of my Christian friends. I ask that of my New Age friends. I ask that of my truther friends. I ask that of anyone and everyone. What would you do? What will you do when you see irrefutable evidence that disproves the validity of things that you have always believed in? There is no religion higher than truth. Here's the table of contents. This is important because it shows us that we're going to go step by step from A to Z. And we're going to go through all of these things. And this gives you just a wonderful A to Z on what the message of the Christ was all about, what the real New Testament was all about. And it comes from the man that was with the Christ and was literally the last apostle in the world that ever was with the Christ. Now this is important because, and if you've followed my work at all, you know this, but if you haven't, it's important to know that I always go right back to the original languages, and I always stay there, linger there, show you exactly where I get what I'm getting. And capital letters followed by numbers refer to the Hebrew and Greek Strong's Concordance for specific word numbers found therein. Helps refers to the Helps Bible Study. There's these books called, and most of you know this, but again, this is basic training. The Strong's Exhaustive Concordance of New Testament Words is for the most part, objective, almost entirely objective, but they do still try to put in the orthodox spin at times. But it's a list of all the words in the Bible and where they can be found in the Bible and what they mean. So you'll see how it works. Now, few people realize, and even fewer scholars report, that John, the apostle, he waited 50 years after all the other apostles had completed their writing, and then 30 years after every other New Testament writer, really meaning Paul, had finished to finally pen his words. So think about that. All the apostles of Christ write and stop. 50 years goes by. John doesn't say a word. All of a sudden, 50 years later, around 90 AD, he decides, you know what? I have to write this down. 30 years after Paul got through spinning his web, 30 years go by, not a word from John. He finally decides, you know what? I've got to do this. And the question becomes very simply, why did John wait so long? And let's go to John 21 for a discussion of that reason. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus or the Christ loved, following them. This is the disciple who's bearing witness about these things, the one who has written these things. And we know that his testimony is true. Now there are also many other things that the Christ did, were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that had been written. And what John is doing here is referencing his validity after James had been killed. Peter was the unquestioned leader of the apostles. And John cites Peter's authority to validate his own unique credentials as the disciple most beloved by Christ and a man of unique perspective. And then it's very interesting to notice that John said that the disciple who is bearing witness about these things, John said he was bearing witness. This is a very revealing choice of words. Far from being a random turn of phrase, John's usage of this legal term is highly significant. And let's look at why. Bearing witness means testifying, giving evidence. So the Apostle John writes and he says, look, man, I am giving legal testimony. I am giving sworn statements. In what circumstances is one compelled to give legal testimony and provide evidence? Well, of course, in a trial. When something's being disputed, when something is contested, John goes on to, in modern terms, swear under oath. Now, this frames his writings in the most serious of terms and should alert us to pay very close attention to what John believed to be of the utmost importance. Information he made certain to separate from the realm of personal opinion, philosophy, and speculation. He didn't say, this is what I'm telling you. He said, this is what I'm testifying to be as true under a court of law, so to speak. The words of the final message of the last apostle are sworn legal testimony of the highest import. This testimony is true. I'm given legal testimony and it can't be hidden. Undeniable reality when something is fully tested, ultimately shown to be fact. That's from the Strong's and from the Helps, the Bible Helps, which is the most objective Bible study tool I've ever found. So a full modern rendering of this passage would be, I'm testifying and giving evidence to bring to light things that can no longer be hidden. Things that, when fully tested, will ultimately be shown to be true. Do you get the idea of why we talked about false flag at the beginning? Something big was going on. John found himself in the middle of a controversy serious enough to motivate him to break 4 decades of silence. He wrote to testify and bring to light things that he could no longer allow to be hidden. And that's why you are here, because you can no longer allow things to be hidden. You can no longer go along with things that you know aren't right. And that is the very reason why John wrote his works, the Gospel of John, the 3 letters of John, and parts of Revelation that he in fact did write. So John was writing to tell you exactly what you need to know for the place that you're in today. Wanting to come out of error and into truth, wanting to come out of darkness and into light. So we do have the Apostle John to thank for this. And the question is, what was going on? Well, for over 3 years, John walked with the Christ, hearing firsthand the greatest message ever delivered to humanity, in my opinion. And then, after the Christ's departure, John spent the next few years working arm in arm with the other 11 apostles in the infant Yeshua movement. All was well, peace, harmony, a single unified message. But then sometime in the early 40s AD, this did begin to change. And let's see what that footnote is. For some reason I can't see. Oh, here it was. That footnote is, in the early 40s AD, this began to change. A competing message was starting to take shape and grow. James wrote his epistle in AD 47, which was the first apostolic statement against the Pauline message. So that's what that footnote there means. This message that was beginning to change, there was a competing message that started to take shape and grow. This message was actually an attempt to co-opt the teachings of the Christ and make them into something diametrically opposed to their original intent. But with first James and then Peter leading the defense of the original message, John was content to continue in a supporting role. He maintained this role even after the passing of the other apostles. John wasn't a rabble-rouser. John wasn't a real upfront leader. John was more of a behind-the-scenes kind of guy. And as long as James and Peter and the other apostles were taking care of business, John was very content to just sit back and not be out front. John was confident that the apostolic message was going to carry the day. He saw no reason to write, and why should he? The defense of the original message of the Christ was in good stead. The apostolic movement was continuing to preach and be taught all over Jerusalem. The young movement was gaining strength and converts every day. As a result, the competing message was driven from the largest city in Judea to the outer reaches of the province and beyond. The late 50s through the early 60s could be called the golden age of the apostles. So the Christ comes and he talks, stays there for 2-3 years, lays out his message. The disciples are there. They continue to follow up on his message and preach and teach it there in Jerusalem. They have a very strong following in Jerusalem, so strong that this competing message that arises can't really compete in Jerusalem, so it and its messenger goes out to the provinces outside the city. So everything's going great. And then all of a sudden, it came to a screeching halt when the Roman general Titus marched his army into Judea in 70 A.D. Jerusalem was compassed about by armies. The Roman legions were the literal fulfillment of the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not be. I do have a video about the abomination of desolation, and we'll link it in the bottom. That's kind of getting beyond basics, but it's part of basics, so we'll put that in. But it's very plain from the Scripture, and that's what we're all about, is the Scripture, that the Roman legions were the fulfillment of the abomination of desolation. From February through August, they laid siege to Jerusalem. In the end, the temple was destroyed. Over 1 million people died. It really was an abomination of desolation. And more than that, not only did the destruction of Jerusalem claim 1 million souls, but it decimated the base of the original Yeshua movement. In an instant, the movement's strength had become its weakness, because the vast majority of its proponents and adherents were destroyed with the city. And then those that did escape, incidentally following words of the Christ, most of them were killed a short time later at Masada. And with Jerusalem gone, the competing message was left largely unopposed, and its leader was a Roman citizen. And he skillfully crafted his message so that while it did great violence to the original teachings of the Christ, it was not antagonistic to Rome, and it was even supportive of the Roman Empire. So both were strong recruiting tools, while the smoke from Jerusalem was still swirling into the sky. And this is the thing that motivated John. He saw that the new competing message was growing stronger by the day. He saw what was going on. He saw that a guy that he personally mentored and worked with was showing signs of being swayed, and he was the guy that would originally put together the New Testament, completely out of order. More on that later. John realized that his worst fears were coming to pass because the original message of the Christ was in retreat. The original teachings of Yeshua were being so suppressed, oppressed, to the point where they were almost unrecognizable, swallowed up, morphed, and twisted by this competing message. And this is why John wrote, because soon he'd realized it would be too late. He no longer had the luxury of silence. And many of you are in that same place. You've realized that you no longer have the luxury of just going along with the program. You no longer have the luxury of silence. You no longer have the luxury of acquiescence. You know that it's time to do something. And John knew. He was the last apostle. His voice had to be heard. He could not continue to stand idly by and witness the death of the great message that his friends had given their lives for. He had to testify, give evidence, teach for the things that were being swept away. He had to bring to light dark secrets. He had to defend truth. He had to expose error. He had to write. And you have to come out of error. You have to embrace truth. And that's why this is the message for you. And this is the basic training of that message. John waited so long to write because it wasn't until the end of his life that the knowledge, events, and necessity finally coalesced, allowing him to discern the rise of religious beast and what was behind it. He finally understood that he'd been kept alive to identify and expose dark forces lurking in the background of history. And that's why you're here at this point in time, my friend. Your history, your life, everything from the time of your conception, and maybe even before, has led you to this point. To this point where you have come to the place in your mind and you've said, you know what? I'm not willing to be bamboozled anymore. I'm not willing to be tricked anymore. I know it's easier to be fooled than it is to realize you've been fooled, but I've realized it, and I'm no longer going to be quiet about the cracks I've seen in religion. I'm no longer going to be quiet about the dark forces that I sense lurking. I have to make a change. I have to get some answers. And cousin, we're in the answer providing business. and business is a booming. Because it's easy for us because we're just providing the answers that were already provided by the Apostle John. Now, let's take a look at this and listen to this. And this is John writing, and this was revolutionary to me because he said, "Now there were also many other things that the Christ did, and if every one of them were to be written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. And we've long been left to wonder what these deeds and teachings of the Christ might have been. How wonderful it would have been to be in John's position to actually know them. And what if John is whetting our appetite here? What if he's setting us up for an expectation that he has every intention of satisfying? As we study and read on, we'll see the unfolding of a deliberate effort by the last apostle to broaden our spiritual horizons and to expand our spiritual eyes and ears. Do you really think that this one compilation of books called the Bible, which is, by my estimations, up to 75% dung, only 25% diamond, do you really think that this compilation of books approved by the Roman Empire, approved by the British Empire, do you really think this one collection of books changed, altered, forged, meandered with for at least 2,000 years? Do you really believe this is the only truth that there is about the message of the Christ? Is this John's hint to tell us that there might be other books that contain valuable information about the deeds and teachings of the Christ? These books might well come from all areas of earth and from all times, and maybe even beyond. Now, here's one thing I want you to know, and this is very important as we're in this basic training. I've been studying the Bible now for 36 years, and I've become convinced that there's been a carefully orchestrated effort to keep the vast majority of us from acquiring a personal working knowledge of the true contents of the original message of the Christ and his apostles. And today, this argument kind of takes the form of, well, you can't really understand the Bible unless you went to Bible college, so you should listen to those that have gone to Bible college. Now, I'm one of those who have. And it is true that the only way to get a complete grasp of the biblical sayings is to understand them in their original language. Now, that used to mean studying biblical Greek. That used to mean studying biblical Hebrew. Then along came interlinear Bibles, and bam! Those are Bibles that render the original language and then a word-by-word rendition of the accompanying English. And that allows anyone to see what's exactly in the original word, how it's translated, and how accurate that translation is. Additionally, we've got the concordances we've already talked about that give you full definition of the original words and how they were used. All you need to know to understand the Bible as well as a PhD level seminarian is to be able to read the English language. And there may be these books in other languages. I'm sure there are. So if you can read your native language, you have to be able to read. And until recently, all of the books that were required for doing this in-depth study were very expensive. You had to buy these things as actual books, and they were very, very expensive. But the internet has changed all that. You don't even have to afford the books anymore. If you know how to use a search engine and have basic internet navigation skills, you can know everything a PhD level seminarian student knows. And as a result, the original Bible teachings are open as never before to anyone with a little initiative. Now, of course, all those dudes wearing dresses and fancy robes, all those letters after their name, they don't want you to know this. They don't want to share this information. They want to keep it as a secret decoder ring club where only they can get the answers, meaning you have to come to them. They don't want you to be independent. They don't want you to be sovereign. They don't want you to be free. Anyone can study on their own now. Anyone can learn on their own. Anyone can decide on their own. It's now possible to leave the land of human indoctrination. It's now possible to leave the land of religious indoctrination, pastor, priest, politician, and go into the realm of divine enlightenment. You don't have to wait for some other person to tell you what to believe anymore. You can figure out for yourself exactly what to believe. The truth is that it's a planned, organized, and systematic attempt to lock humanity into only the manifestations and workings of what is known as our left brain. The goal was to keep us operating only on the levels of of logic and intellect, and prevent the forces of our creative mind to come in. Now let me just tell on myself a little bit. I didn't understand this until I was out preaching on my own. I was like Jimmy Swaggart meets Tony Robbins. That's the kind of my kind of style was. And I believed what I was saying, and I worked hard to convince others of what I was saying too. But then one day I realized that even if someone accepts what I was saying because I said it, that's not good enough. That's why we're doing this basic training here, because I don't want you to say, oh, well, Jeff has a lot of Bible study, over 100,000 hours, 36 years. I think he knows what he's talking about. I'm going to go ahead and believe him. I don't want that. The divine doesn't want that. You don't want that. It's not real, it's not true until it's real and true to you. And it's not real until you get it down on your inside. The Bible does not say the truth will set you free. That's a lie. The Bible says you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. It's only the truth you know that will set you free, and it's only the truth that you know for yourself that will set you free. If you believe me, you're getting nothing more than human indoctrination. And I made a decision way back then to stop trying to convince people and to start showing people how to learn. To stop telling people what to believe and start inspiring them to study, to discover, to piece it all together, and then decide for yourselves. That is really the seed of divine enlightenment. That's what enlightenment's all about. Anything other than that's called indoctrination, my friends. And what do you want, indoctrination or enlightenment? You can, if you want indoctrination, just stay in your church. They got plenty of it. If you want enlightenment, you're in the right place. Enlightenment occurs as we break out of the dominant left brain worldview and allow our inspiration, our love, and our creativity to manifest. Our highest goal should be to have both sides of our brain working together. And when we get this full realization of our higher self, and it connects with the universe, the cosmos, or whatever you want to call it, we move into indoctrination. And simply put, indoctrination is the work of religion. Enlightenment is the work of the Christ. Now, I'll break this down. This is kind of silly, but most of you know about Star Trek. Mr. Spock was all left brain, right? Captain Kirk was all right brain. And between the two of them, they got it right. And that's what we're encouraging you to do. Listen to your inner Captain Kirk and listen to your inner Mr. Spock. And this book and this series, this basic training is against all isms of any type and description. It's against indoctrination. It's against the prisons that it builds. And in this book, I don't advocate any faith, any religion, any dogma, just the original teachings of the Christ. And we might as well start at the beginning. As difficult as it is for many to accept the name Jesus as applied to the man from Nazareth in the New Testament is a gross error. I know it's hard, but this is basic training. The English rendering of a Jesus is the English rendering of a translation into Greek of a Hebrew name. Now, as a rule, proper names are never translated. Think about it. Do you know about Lenny the Victor, or do you know about Leonardo da Vinci? Why don't you know him as Lenny the Victor or Leonard the Victor? Because you don't translate proper names. Leonardo da Vinci is Leonardo da Vinci whether he's in Italy or whether he's in Clearwater, Florida. He doesn't walk up to you in Clearwater and say, "Hello, I am Leonard." No. He'd say, Buonasera, Leonardo. Or something like that. Do you know of Charlemagne or Chuck? Do you know of Cologne or Christopher Columbus? I rest my case. Now, if you want to prove this to yourself, all you have to do is turn on your TV. You've got 397 channels. Go to any one of the foreign language channels and watch the news. Spanish, Russian, whatever. Watch the news. And you're going to, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful because I'm trying to learn a foreign language, but you'll hear Spanish, 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 Donald Trump. Spanish, 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 Hillary Clinton. Spanish, 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 Jeff Doherty. Hopefully that'll happen someday, right? You never ever hear them translate proper names into their language because you just don't do that. Now, if the Galilean walked into your room right now, introduced himself and shook your hand, he'd probably say something like, "Hi, I'm Yahashua," but we're friends, so he might just say Yeshua. So therefore, I've gotten rid of the name of Jesus in this book, and I've actually replaced Yeshua now and call him the Christ because of a lot of other reasons that we'll get to later. But this is basic training. So when I'm talking about the Christ, I'm talking about Yeshua. And in this book, I want to list the verse as it appears in the King James Version of the Bible because that's what you're most familiar with. And this is basic training. Then we'll pull out the pieces of the verse for a closer inspection. Then we'll define the words literally, and then we'll give a literal English rendering of the verse. And I'll do this using the online reference materials that I've spoken of earlier, and you're encouraged to do it yourself. When you see a Greek, a G, or an H listed followed by number, again, that's the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance of Biblical Words. You'll also notice Thayer's Bible Dictionary. You'll notice Help's Word Study. These all provide additional expansion of word usage and meaning from a Christian organization that claims to help readers recognize original language meanings with symbols and tools provided in text and gain skills to apply this new understanding. Somehow, I don't think these folks ever imagined their work being used in quite this way. But you'll also see some regular references to Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages. Doesn't mean I agree with everything in the book. Just means that there are some good stuff. There is some good stuff in that book, and we will refer to it from time to time. So I think that sets the table well for us. It gives us a real understanding of what we're going to look at, how we're going to look at it, why we're going to look at it, and really sets us up with a great system for approaching our basic training, letting the man that wrote the book, letting the man that wrote the final message, letting the last apostle tell us and give us the final will and testament of the apostolic era. That's some basic training, my friends, and that's what this is all about. Again, if you want to get the book, $199 in the ebook format, $24.99 in the handsome paperback format. And if you want to have me sign it, I'll be glad to do that. No extra charge, but it would take a couple extra days for the book to get to you because I'll have to come to me first, then I'll have to send it on to you, and I'll pay for the postage. But I think I'll do that. If you really want one, let's talk about that. But that's what we're doing. Jeffrey Daugherty, Final Message to the Last Apostle, basic training from the last apostle. Unwinding our minds, unindoctrinating ourselves, learning to guide our own spirits, learning to master our own ascension, learning to be our own guru, learning to be excellent to ourselves, so we then can truly be excellent to each other.